I should point out that it wasn't as Wagner would have it. It wasn't Signy. Wagner called her Sieglinde, who was the mother of our hero, but another woman altogether. You see, in the saga, many years have passed. Siegmund is now an aging warrior. Even so, he just married a very young woman, and she would soon bear him a child. Another thing I should mention, according to Nordic legend, only men who die in battle could go and live forever with Wotan in Valhalla. A man who died in bed, it was called a straw death, was doomed to a kind of netherworld of ignominy. So it was that Wotan decided the time had come for Siegmund. Wotan was going to withdraw the magic protection of Gram, the great sword, and let Siegmund die. Wotan gave Brunhild, his favorite Valkyrie, her instructions. The next time Siegmund was in battle, she was to allow him to be slain, and then carry him to Wotan in everlasting glory. Soon the day came when the old hero was bashing away in one of those endless feuds that occupied Nordic communities. Wotan ordered Brunhild into action. She and all the other Valkyries swept out of the skies and on to the field of battle. Brunhild was not only strong but vigilant, and she took in the scene at a glance. The battle was taking place on Siegmund's home ground. He was defending his own village from attack. His young bride of only a few months was watching fearfully as she and the other women ran to and fro, putting out fires and tending to the wounded. Brunhild knew that this girl was pregnant with Siegmund's son. If Siegmund, as leader of the clan, was slain, the village would be overrun and the inhabitants killed or enslaved. Now Brunhild remembered her orders from Wotan, but she couldn't bring herself to abandon Siegmund's bride to such a fate, when in fact Siegmund was fighting so valiantly to save them all. Instead of allowing him to be killed, Brunhild began to use her shield to protect him from the blows. At that moment, Wotan appeared on the field of battle. He instantly took in the situation. Brunhild was defying his instructions. Furious, he struck aside her shield, and with that same stroke broke the magic sword of Siegmund. Moments later, Siegmund was cut down. His wife, who had been watching, rushed out to help him, but he told her to stop. He was ready to die, he said. She must gather up the pieces of the broken sword and save them for their son. That son was to be the greatest of heroes, to be named Siegfried. These were Siegmund's last words. Again it was Brunhild who observed all of this and now showed herself to the fainting woman. Brunhild gathered her up and swept away into the darkness. At least she could do that much for the slain Siegmund. She carried the girl deep in the forest and laid her gently on the grass. Soon she'd be discovered by the hermit who lived nearby. This place was safe from Wotan's wanderings because it wasn't far from the lair of the gruesome dragon Fafnir. Brunhild now returned to face Wotan's wrath. Wotan loved Brunhild beyond any of his other warrior daughters. She was his special favorite. That was what made her defection so hard to take. She must be made to pay a terrible price. In his fury, Wotan took away her superhuman powers. Now she was a mere mortal, no longer a Valkyrie. He was going to stake her out to the nearest hillside and let the first man who came along have his way with her. Brunhild was shamed and horrified. How could he do this to her? Desperately she pled her case. She had disobeyed him for a good reason. Siegmund's baby was at that very moment being born and would one day be the pure hero who could undo the curse of the dwarf gold. This hero would be able to break the pledge Wotan had made to the giants without his direct involvement and get the gold back into the hands of Andvari where it belonged. Wotan was moved by the sense of her argument. Besides, he didn't want to lose her to such a fate. She went on to beg that she be made accessible only to a great hero, as was due her station. Wotan finally agreed to amend his punishment. He would place her on a high rock and surround her with fire. Only the bravest of heroes would think of crossing that barrier. Until that time, she would sleep undisturbed. Weeping Brunhild with the thorn of sleep and held her to him until she lost consciousness. Then he placed her across the back of his great horse and rode high into the mountains. Laying her gently on a cliff top, he removed her armor and covered her with her shield. Then he called to Loki to ring the cliff with fire. Now Brunhild lay sleeping on the heights, awaiting her hero. We must return to the forest where Brunhild had left Siegmund's widow. As Brunhild had foretold, the widow was discovered by the hermit. He had cared for her through the birth of her baby. The child she bore was healthy and strong, but she hadn't the will to live and died a few hours later. This left the hermit to raise the babe as best he could. This hermit was none other than our old friend Regan, former frost giant and brother of Fafnir the dragon. Regan was somewhat diminished after his beating and banishment, but in the intervening years he'd become an accomplished ironsmith. Somehow he was able to rear the child through infancy to young manhood. As the boy reached maturity, he realized the youngster could be the solution to his getting the gold back from his brother. Regan would somehow get the youth to kill Fafnir, and the gold would be his at last. The dying mother had told Regan two things. The boy's name was Siegfried, and about the sword, which was Siegfried's inheritance from his father. The sword wasn't much use, broken as it was. Twice Regan had tried to repair it, but simply couldn't get the fire hot enough to fuse the metal. Now that Siegfried was attaining manhood, the sword was again an issue. Regan kept telling Siegfried about the dreadful dragon in such a way as to intrigue him, not to scare him, that only a brave man could overcome the dragon. It was obvious that Siegfried was too young, too inexperienced, and probably too weak for the contest. All this had just the right effect. The fact was that Siegfried had never known the emotion of fear, not from the moment of his birth. He could run like a deer, he was hugely strong for his age, and showed great physical prowess. Siegfried demanded that Regan show him the dragon so he could kill it.
My boy, you're going to need more than your bare hands for the job.
Well then, make me a sword for the purpose. Then Regan told him about the sword of Siegmund and how he had tried to mend it and failed. Siegfried ordered him to try again. Regan made another attempt, but he failed again. At this point, Siegfried, who had been at his side the whole time, pushed him away and took over. For hours, Siegfried labored over the blazing forge. At last he finished. He raised the completed effort over his head and brought it down with a crack on the anvil, splitting the anvil in two. The magic sword Gram lived again. Regan realized that now was the time to strike. Siegfried was primed and ready for the confrontation. Other than the great sword, his hunting horn, and a bit of bread, Siegfried had nothing with him to sustain him. You see, it wasn't Regan's plan to share the gold with Siegfried once Fafnir was slain. Regan intended to kill Siegfried himself at that point. At last they arrived. A small stream ran down through a declivity in the rocks. At its base you could see the cave opening. All was surrounded by forest. Regan knew from prior observations that once a day Fafnir slithered down to the stream to drink. It had to be then that Siegfried would strike. After explaining all this to Siegfried, he left the boy to do the job. Regan then went off to hide in the trees and watch what would happen. Siegfried was standing in front of the cave wondering what to do next. He could hear the muffled snores of the dragon from within. Noxious vapors issued forth from the mouth of the cave. If he went inside, he'd probably be trapped, so he was going to have to wait till the dragon came out. As he was wondering how he might conceal himself for the attack, he realized he wasn't alone. He spun round, sword at the ready. There was an old man wrapped in a long blue robe watching him. The old man told Siegfried to dig a hole just deep enough to crouch in, right in the path of the cave's opening. Then get down in the hole and the dragon would pass right over him, and Siegfried could eviscerate him as he did so. Much as he hated advice, he followed the old man's instructions. When he turned to get his approval, the stranger had vanished. Just at that moment, the earth trembled slightly and there was an ominous rumbling. The dragon was coming forth. Quickly he got down in the pit and held his sword ready for the thrust. Moments later, the huge head of the monster issued forth. The stench was awful, but Siegfried held his breath in readiness. The dragon was blinded by the sunlight and seemingly unaware of any danger. He moved out and over the pit. Siegfried was ready. With a mighty heave, he lunged upward and shoved the blade deep into the underbelly of the serpent. Instantly, the huge beast reared up and away from the agony, bellowing with rage and pain. would have been drowned in the blood and opal which now gushed down, nearly filling the pit. As it was, he was covered from head to foot with scalding blood. Shouting with pain, he scrambled out of the pit and threw himself headfirst into the icy stream. A few moments later, he was back on the bank, shivering and dripping, and watching Fafnir's final agonies. Trembling with excitement, Regan crept out of the forest to get a closer look at his dying brother. Once satisfied that Fafnir was really dead, he turned to Siegfried and revealed his relationship to Fafnir and the golden hoard kept within the cave. Siegfried was staggered by all this, but still too exhilarated by his combat to take it all in. The ancient Norsemen had a tradition of eating the hearts of their enemies, at least their most powerful enemies. So Regan now ordered Siegfried to cut out Fafnir's heart and roast it for him to eat. When Siegfried was doing this, he tested the flesh to see if it was cooked and burned his fingers. Instinctively, he put them in his mouth. The moment he did that, he had tasted the blood of the dragon. Two very important things had just occurred. The minute he was washed in the blood of the dragon, he became invulnerable to sharp objects. Then, when he tasted the dragon's blood, he was given the ability to understand the songs of birds. Siegfried shortly realized he was hearing voices. It was the birds. They were warning him to watch out for Regan. Regan was going to kill him. Out of the corner of his eye, he could see that Regan was edging up to him. So Siegfried pretended to put his weapon aside. Just as Regan leaned down to grab him, Siegfried whirled around with the sword in both hands and slashed off Regan's head. Filled with his victory over the dragon, Siegfried emerged from these events a new man. He was invulnerable, was able to understand bird songs, had a vast treasure, and had the magic sword. At this point, he set off to see the world. Even though he had many adventures and was becoming known as Siegfried the Dragon Slayer, he was constantly guided by the birds higher and higher into the mountains. Occasionally, he caught glimpses of a distant fire. As he got nearer, he could see it was a fire of considerable size. When at last he reached the top of a crag, he saw the cause. There before him was a vast circle of flames with a dark form in the center. He strode through the flames, only to find them flicker and die as he did so. As the magic fire faded, he saw before him what appeared to be the body of a warrior wrapped in armor. He was curious to see the face of one so strangely honored. Siegfried lifted away the shield and cloak, only to discover no bearded warrior, but the face and form of a tall and lovely woman. Siegfried was completely overwhelmed by her beauty. Without thinking, he bent down to embrace her. The moment he did that, Brunhild awakened and recognized her hero at once. She embraced him in return. Without a word, and with instant understanding, their union was consummated. As the dawn light rose in the east, Brunhild and Siegfried lay in each other's arms, pledging everlasting love. Siegfried placed the magic ring of Anvary on her hand as his token, and she in turn shared her wisdom with him. These days were the high point in the life of Siegfried, but soon he would leave Brunhild's loving arms and at her urging go on with his adventures, one day to return. Of course, that is not the way things turn out in Nordic legends. We, however, will leave it here for now. This ends the first half of the Siegfried Saga, or the Song of Siegfried. Other matters must be spoken of.